I'd like to share with you a little bit about spiritualism. And for this little note, we're going to be referencing Arthur Conan Doyle's History of Spiritualism. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Hydesville knockings. If you're not, Hydesville, New York is where the sisters Kate and Margaret first heard the rappings, and they got the rappings woke their parents up, and they investigated and thought the kids were messing around. And when they discovered they weren't, they Mr. Fox went and fetched some of the neighbors, and they gathered around. And the youngest one, I believe, was Kathy. She named the spirit Mr. Splitfoot and said, "Mr. Splitfoot, do as I do." And she would bang on something, and then the rappings would repeat the same number of times. Mrs. Fox, their mother, asked several questions. And one of the questions was, "How many children do I have?" And there were three raps, one for Kate, one for Margaret, one for Leah. There was a pause, and then there was a fourth rap. And that was the child that had died earlier. So with that, sometime afterwards, the mother and the two daughters went to stay at one of the neighbors, and then the neighbors gathered around, and it was a Mr. Juicler who took control and introduced a means of communicating. And what he did was he said with each letter that he called out, that there would be a knock. So through this process, they learned that Mr. Splitfoot was actually Charles B. Rosema, who was a peddler. And apparently he had been murdered the year previous, or at least previously, before the Foxes occupied the house. And they learned that he had been buried in the cellar about 10 feet deep. So later they went to investigate. They dug in the cellar. They found water, but they didn't find any remains. I neglected to tell you that this occurred in March 31st of 1848. And it was in the summer that they began to dig some more to discover if there was actually a body there. They didn't find anything significant, with the exception of a plank, some charcoal, some quicklime, and then some hair and bones. So they found something, but it wasn't until November of 1904 that Rosema's skeleton had been found. And it was this discovery, several years later, it looks like maybe about 6 years later, that the sisters had been exonerated, because a lot of people felt that they were playing games, cracking knuckles, bouncing apples off the floor, and that sort of thing. But one of the other interesting things about this discovery is the Hydesville incident here may be the first record of mediumship being used in a forensic fashion. Now, forensics is all about a legal investigation. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of the mediums of this day who have been used by the police departments across the country to find missing children, missing persons, and other things. So that gives you a little idea of what spiritualism has been through. Does anybody have any questions or comments?